This is John B. Lane, and I wrote a book called The Beatin Path, a lyrical guide to lucid evolution. Which part of the human mind will finalize our fate? The part that wrote the Gettysburg Address, or the part that murdered Abraham Lincoln? The Beatin Path levels a look at both the enemies of human progress and the better angels of our nature. The cast of this collection includes The Bird Who Wouldn't Fly, Flim and Flam, the richest men in the world, Satchel Paige, Galileo, Moondoggie, The Monster and the Fool, Abraham and Onan, George Orwell, Charles Darwin, young Hector, and The Alchemist's Apprentice. The Beatin Path is an illustrated, inspirational kaleidoscope of poetry and prose, of heroes and villains, of humor and of hope.
Book Lovers Unite! I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 Podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. Well, how's it going, everybody? How's the year going so far? Are you in the swing of things? Have you found your rhythm? Well, whether you have or haven't, I've got something that can help. It's called The Beatin Path and was written by a wonderful author by the name of John Lane. John is a really smart dude and has written an incredible book. It talks about life and how we perceive things and basically how we can become more aware and overcome these mental or emotional limitations that may be holding us back. So we have a great philosophical conversation, and I kind of nerd out a little bit, but I'm really into these kind of books that help bend and shift your perspective. So stick around because John shares The Beatin Path right now.
Are you sure? That thing that someone told you, are you sure? Are you sure that he or she or they or it knew any more than you of which they spoke? Did you question the veracity of the assertion or the motive of the speaker? What evidence did he or she or they provide? Any evidence at all? Or did you just accept the things they said were true because they had the nerve to say them, and you assumed that they knew more than you? If so, why did you assume? Have you no mind to use yourself? Does someone tell you what to eat and when? Does someone tell you what gives you pleasure and what does not? On whose authority are you so told? On mine? But how on earth could I know? How could anyone, indeed? Anyone that is but you. So why should I or he or she or they presume to tell you what to feel or what to think or what is true? Unless, of course, there's something I or we or they want out of you, some kind of gain that follows from your unquestioned acquiescence. Up is down and day is night, and 2 + 2 is 5. You understand these things, of course, do you not? I would not wish to share your shame in believing these things somehow not so. How dreadful would that be? How unfortunate for you. But I can see that you can see that 1 + 1 is always 3, obviously. So we agree. And now you sign this line, and what is yours will now be mine, because you can clearly see that 1 + 1 is simply 3. Congratulations on our new relationship. For your convenience, I'll deduct your payments automatically on the 1st and 15th day of every month, in return for which you will be relieved of the disgrace of misunderstanding anything I might have said that results from inadequate capacity in your ability to recognize that up is down and day is night and 1 + 1 is 3. D'accord? Mais oui, obviously. So by virtue of your standing there, someone else said something, and in your civility, you accepted what was said, because you assume a reciprocity in sincerity and veracity. Is that the way it happens? A courtesy extended? Oh, it should not be a source of doubt. At least it should not have to be. For without such presumptions of good intent, there could be no society. Without such presumptions of good intent, we would devolve back to that state of nature from whence we once arose. Suspicion and hostility would poison every moment. Kill or be a morsel would be our eternal, exhausting preoccupation. Not the easiest way for Homo sapiens to make their way from B to A. Better for a lion or shark or tyrannosaurus, shall we say. And yet, and yet, and yet, and yet. Predation lurks among those who walk upright on two legs. Though they may not seem to be a threat or appear to be a danger, they lurk here and there, and maybe in your underwear. They may predate with malevolence. They may predate with greed. They may predate with ignorance. But they predate to meet their need, not your need, their need. And you may be their need. They will make it easy as they can for you to meet their need. No money down, and they will leave you be, for now. You mean well, and because you have a soul that feels, it is not your nature to resist the ostensible need of a fellow passenger who captures your attention. If you are able to assist in reducing the discomfort in this passing moment, it would not occur to you to not. You would trust that someone else would do the same for you. In fact, your kindness rests on this good faith. It is the epoxy of society, and it is the faith on which malevolence most often preys. I would not take advantage of you, therefore you would not take advantage of me. More often than not, he or she or they or it might not. Then again, they might. Maybe 1 in every 10 or 1 in every 20. No matter, they are there, and you'd be well advised to be aware. It's not as hard as it might sound. Just don't forget to be aware. Perhaps the last 10 people you entrusted proved worthy of your trust. Perhaps the next 10 will as well. But eventually, as the sun is hot, I promise you that one will not. So what's an honest person left to do? Simply this: do not assume. Instead, insist, with all the courtesy that fits. Demand a reason, check the math. Use your gut if gut you must, but examine all the evidence and then bestow your trust. Or not, if the numbers don't add up. Then add them up again and ever after. Always question each assumption, even those you've certified were true. Is it true today? Is it true right now? Why? How? How about now?
Reading your book, it reminds me of the same feeling I had when I read the Tao Te Ching, where you read the passage and it's simple and it's like, oh, that's interesting. But then as it kind of sinks in and marinates, you're like, oh, and you understand it from a totally different perspective.
That's the highest compliment you could give me, really. That I love that book, really. It's the top of Mount Olympus for me.
Yeah, you did a fantastic job with this book. So just so we can give the listeners a foundation, let's go over a couple of definitions. Your book is a lyrical guide to lucid evolution. What is lucid evolution?
Right. I think of it as just a sort of a conscious evolution. In other words, I kind of feel like humans have a unique opportunity in that, given that we have conscious minds and are aware of the concept of evolution and have these vast, unbelievable cognitive potentials, we're sort of unique among the animal kingdom in that we can kind of decide how we want to evolve, or decide that we want to evolve and become better than we were. So I think that part of the intention here is that it's almost like sort of a pep talk. We can actually choose a more enlightened course if we want to, and I think that would be a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, self-awareness and free will.
Absolutely, yeah, and that can go many different directions, but I'd like to hope that maybe we can get a critical mass of people who want to continue to pursue a more enlightened state of being,
Right.
expanded consciousness.
And the next term was belief system. What is a belief system in relation to your book?
Well, it's a term that I use quite a bit in the book, and it really, to me, it's just a term I chose to represent a number of things that could fall into categories of anything from, kind of political party lines, academic theories, conspiracy theories, religions, anything that people adopt in their lives that they embrace sort of in the absence of further questioning or examination. And I try to kind of detail some of the consequences of that. That's what I consider the negative consequences of adopting belief systems, including the fact that it sort of disables our ability to interact in real time with the world.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, we're filtering the world through belief systems that we don't challenge or question, and among other things, this prevents us from living an authentic life and from pursuing a lucid evolution. It locks us into ways of thinking and ways of being that I think there are harmful consequences from.
So that's kind of an example of the way that belief systems can somewhat hinder us or limit us.
Absolutely, because I think, if you just look at the natural world of which we're a part, it's we have to adapt and adjust in real time to an ever-changing environment. All living things do that, and it's really the basis of evolution. But if we as humans, again, this is a kind of a unique thing that humans can do. We can choose to kind of lock down our minds so that we really don't necessarily see the world around us as it is. We're seeing it filtered through these belief systems, and that therefore inhibits our ability to adapt in real time to an ever-changing environment, and inhibits our ability to evolve and ultimately to survive. I mean, I think there are lots of examples that we could talk about, things like climate change being, one particular example where we are at risk of destroying our whole habitat. This is not a small thing. This is counter to, the natural order of things. And I think belief systems play a role in preventing at least some people from seeing the danger and taking action to try to head off that danger.
And I think the operative word you used was filter. How we all see the world and perceive it through our own personal filters that we created just through our own experiences in life.
Belief systems sort of become this secondhand filter
Mm-hmm.
that was created. It created, depending on the belief system, could have been created 2,000 or 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But if we are prevented by belief systems that we have used our conscious minds to adopt consciously without examination or question or evidence or anything like that, then we inhibit our ability to do those things that are necessary in order for us to survive and thrive.
Right. Absolutely. Something as basic as far as perspective, even having somebody look at your manuscript, because after a while you can't see the errors anymore. You just get adjusted to what you see.
Well, true. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, just our own personal biases,
Mm-hmm.
which can be affected by all kinds of different things. But yeah, that can definitely inhibit us.
Well, I haven't read a book like yours in a very, very long time, in which you actually experience kind of your own awareness, or there's a shift in consciousness. How did you first become self-aware?
You mean just as a person or
Yeah,
as a
yeah, just as a
writer?
person. Like, for example, for me, it was when I first saw The Matrix, believe it or not, because it was
Mm-hmm.
the first time I realized, oh my goodness, other people think like I do. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
crazy.
Yeah, which is a really nice feeling to have. uh, Definitely. I don't know. That's a great question. I think I kind of remember a moment when I was pretty young, and I have no idea why I had this sort of insight or notion or whatever. But it was just a moment I remember. I was playing by myself as a pretty young kid, and I could just kind of see myself in the perspective of larger things. I could see that I was this person living in this city, in this country, on this planet that was part of the solar system and that kind of thing. And I didn't really make much of it at the time, but it always stuck with me. And if I had to pick a kind of first time that I had some kind of awareness like that, that was it for
Hmm.
whatever reason.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that question is because sometimes people just naturally have that extra perception, and then other folks acquire it over time. And there's a lot of books out there that try to help people to, become more self-aware. Or you seem like the type that naturally evolved this way in your own life. So that's what I was curious.
I think it really just boils down to expanding one's consciousness, and I think that's where I think that belief systems tend to be a detriment, because I think they sort of limit our ability to gain conscious awareness of different things.
Even something as simple as just being aware how other people may be perceiving you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, we see that in so many ways in life, people that are, just hostile to other groups that they don't necessarily even know much about. They're making judgments based on either external things or based on belief systems, but they're not based on the reality that, individual people are individuals and
Hmm.
need to be sort of encountered and engaged that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, moving on to the format of your book, I wouldn't call it a collection of poems and short stories because it's a lot more than that. To me, it's like taking a deep dive into a concept or an idea and then flipping it around and seeing it from different angles. But how would you describe it?
Well, I'm happy to hear your description, Demethius, because I had a little trouble myself kind of putting neat shorthand description of what it is. And that really, in part, resulted from the way I wrote it, which was, I had a lot of ideas and that kind of thing, and things that I knew I wanted to talk about, but I really let them sort of present themselves to me in their own way. And so they are individual pieces that I think do kind of create a whole, but it's almost more of a mosaic, or sometimes I think of it as almost like a record album, a
Hmm.
collection of songs. But I think the ideas that were behind what went into it sort of organically helped me create a sort of a tapestry. The pieces do sort of form a bigger whole. The idea that, that maybe it generates self-reflection in the reader, I mean, that's exactly what I was hoping it would do.
Yeah. And that's what I mean by the book isn't just one thing because you have all of these concepts that are coming at you in different ways. And so it requires you to think differently as you're going through the book.
Hmm.
Some of the stories you provide examples of historical figures who somehow had to overcome either physical or mental limitations in their own times.
Right.
Do you think that in today's age, with all of our information and technology, that we're dealing with the same kinds of self restrictions as back then? Or do you think things have evolved and now we're dealing with something else?
My guess would be that, yeah, that's a big question. I think my guess is that it's hard to really understand the challenges that occurred, certainly before our lifetimes. It's hard to know all of the dynamics in the environment that took place in the past. I mean, we can certainly see some specific things. I think in some ways the challenges are fewer, but in some ways they're greater. I mean, just talking about the United States in particular, I think there's been some clear progress made in some areas, but on the other hand, there's been regression in areas, and there are new challenges, and new challenges can include all the kinds of things. I mean, in some ways, I worry a little bit about the culture that we live in now, which doesn't, to me, seem to really encourage the exchange of ideas like it did when I was younger. I mean, like what we're doing right now is kicking some ideas around and that kind of thing. And it doesn't seem like it's a common thing in this country these days. I think a lot of people sort of they keep their heads down and avoid anything that might rock the boat. And I mean, you certainly don't want to get into conversations where people get really hostile and that kind of thing. But it seems like there's a value in discussing things and having feeling comfortable to kick ideas around, because I think that's how we make progress too.
Yeah, absolutely. And just speaking of the way that things are right now, I mean, one of the things that I certainly was not aware of until recently, as far as the last elections, was that through social media, we're kind of creating our own information filters, our own, what do they call them? Something biases. Anyway, I got to look up the term later. But yeah, we're creating our own information bubbles, and we're not getting any other type of ideas to challenge the way we think. We're just getting more information that reinforces what we already think.
Yeah, I wonder if confirmation bias is
Yes,
what you were. Yeah,
confirmation bias.
exactly. I mean, that's absolutely the kind of thing that is, I think, more of a problem now, and increasingly so. Now, in addition to belief systems, we have these physical devices like a smartphone, for example, and the social media that comes through those smartphones, which further filter our inputs, and that's a problem. It seems to just be, well, what I see is fewer and fewer ideas. I actually am beginning to see that changing a little bit, and I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, and it does give me hope when I see people band together, like with the last midterm elections, and there was a number of people that became active, and
Yes.
also the fact that when these awful things happen, there's pushback. It isn't just, oh, business as usual, and just laugh it off or justify it, which is even worse.
Yeah, I am beginning to see more of that. I think
Yeah,
for a long time I didn't really see it, and it concerned me. And my
right.
it's almost like it had to get so bad that it pulled people out of their kind of cautious shells a little bit. And
Yeah.
I see journalists, to me, starting to do a better job of holding vested interests to account, and really challenging false statements that are made, and that's all a really crucial part of this whole thing. But for a long time, it seemed like, politicians, for example, could say absolutely anything and nobody challenged them.
Hmm.
Nobody in the news media challenged them. And I think that's part of what got us into this position.
That's also the value of your book and the type of book that it is, because it's forcing people to think differently, to question belief systems that they think they know and see it from a different perspective.
I hope so. I think it's interesting that, just interesting to me personally, that uh, the book was written really before the current administration in Washington was elected and took power. But the things that I'm pointing out, talking about, just dishonesty and the importance of truth, among other things, have just been amplified kind of since this happened. And so I hope that the themes do resonate.
I tell you, man, when I read your book, I literally just started geeking out. I was like, oh, I'm going to ask this, I'm going
Oh,
to ask that.
I'm thrilled to hear that, Demethius. That's great.
Yeah, this is actually the book that I've always wanted to write myself. So I'm glad that it's out there, and I'm glad that you've been able to put it together, especially in the way that you did, with just the, as you call it, the weaving of concepts and creating a bigger picture.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I did kind of feel like, in terms of the way I wrote it, there were a couple of reasons it kind of came out this way. And one was that, I really thought that a book that is about the idea of challenging conventional wisdom and following the crowd, it really needed to kind of look and feel unique.
Hmm.
So I wasn't really able to comfortably just sit down and write a book that kind of had one single narrative voice through the whole thing. Also, it just was easier for me to write it this way. It allowed me to kind of call on different writing skills that I'd acquired over the years, and have a little fun with it.
Yeah, right on. So, do you have any suggestions, or what are some things that we can do to increase our own self awareness, or at least become aware of our biases?
I think that it has to do, a lot of it has to do with just becoming, again, conscious of a desire to do that. So once you have the idea in your mind that you want to become aware and overcome biases, that's a huge first step. I mean, I guess it's like a substance abuser. They say step one is to acknowledge that you have a problem. So I think becoming aware that you want to be aware of biases and you want to maybe be more conscious of things is definitely step one. And the easiest, quickest way to do that is, in my mind, is to just use what I consider a profoundly powerful word, which is the word why. Just don't accept things that are handed to you, assertions that are made to you. Just, you don't have to be argumentative or live life as a crusade against everything you hear, but it's just a question of wanting to know more about the veracity of the information that you take in. I think that's a big first step. And there are techniques that have been developed over the years that are also useful. I mean, things like scientific method and critical thinking, things like that. It's just the idea really of making sure that whatever you allow to spend time in your mind is something that you've examined, because it's unexamined things that I think cause a lot of the problems.
Okay. Right on, right on. Cool. Well, thank you, John, for sharing your book with us today. And it was really great speaking with you.
It was my pleasure, Demethius. Thank you.
Where can readers go to learn more about you and your books online?
My website is thebeatinpath.com, thebeatinpath.com. I also have a Facebook page at The Beatin Path. And then I think typically you put great information on your website. That might be an easy place for people to find me too.
And with that, we're going to wrap up another episode. Thanks again to John for speaking with us today, and I hope you all enjoyed that conversation. And I hope you were all able to gain something from it, even if it's just thinking about things a little differently than you would have yesterday. If you have any questions for John or for me, or an author who you think would be a good fit for the show, let me know. Connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or send an email to info@ch1podcast.com. Check out our website at ch1podcast.com, where there you can listen to previous episodes and hopefully find your next favorite author. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Overdrive, wherever podcasts can be downloaded. Leave us a 5-star review, but most importantly, tell everyone you know about the show, because that is how we grow. Okay, I think that's it for me. You all stay awesome. Till next time.